Hello and welcome. I hope this is recording. There's going to be a slight delay on my part just to make sure that that is the case. And it appears indeed that we are recording to the cloud. Okay, welcome. So this is Thursday, February 11th. It's 5 after 12 my time. This is the second attempt at trying to record today. Slight technical problem. All right, so for today, I just want to go through a quick summary of the facts, particular facts to the case as we proceed with the drafting, and then go over to the U of A box to give you a little bit of an assignment for the project. But first, it's probably more relevant to begin kind of getting into the details. So I'm going to approach this from geography, from the point of view that we probably can benefit from learning more about our region here in the Southwest. So in front of you is Google Maps. There's other fancier ways to do this with Google Earth Pro, for example, but this gets the job done. All right, so here's the city of Tucson. We're not too far from Nogales, Sonora. You'll see the Highway 19 that gets you there is important because that's the NAFTA highway connection into north central Sonora. In fact, it's a vital link, just as an FYI, because the other major highway link connection is over in Yuma, and then going all the way over to Tijuana. But the reason why this number 19 is strategically important is because it is the major commercial interlink and right-of-way into Mexico, if you want to say Mexico proper. In the sense that if you look over to your west, you'll see that Baja California and Tijuana sit on a peninsula. And so they're not completely cut off from Mexico, but there's just this narrow corridor here, and the rest of the country is over to the east here. The other thing that's kind of relevant, I think, is the fact that this Highway 19 is, for all intents and purposes, the main Arizona connection. If you go up a little further, you'll see that you have to go over to El Paso, Texas, to get another major crossing point. Of course, there are small crossing points along the border, but for commerce and really to move goods overland in Mexico, for Arizona's purpose, it's the number 19. That's the only way to go, because, drumroll, in order to get into the southern part and the central part of Mexico through the west, meaning Sonora, whether you're coming from Tijuana or not out of California, you have to take this, the number 15. Highway 15 is a critical transportation route for the entirety of Mexico, and it has enormous economic value for the west and central and south part of Mexico. And one more aspect that I do want to explain, this, I'll switch to satellite view, is, as you can see, incredibly hilly and mountainous, right? So you have the Chiricahuas over in the north part of the United States, across the border in New Mexico. Then you'll have the Sierra Madres, which break out into a series of kind of sub-ranges. And for our purposes, by the time you get down into Obregon, Sonora, you're going to be facing the Sierra Bacatete range out of the Sierra Madres, which essentially embank this lowland valley in here by Obregon, right? So to back up once more, we have this important artery, the number 15 in Mexico through Nogales, which is the NAFTA highway. And then it is flanked, if you will, by mountains, which are passable, but the roads are much more difficult, and they're much more difficult to maintain. And so by the time NAFTA comes into being, the government funds at a great level a toll highway system that goes from Nogales through the entire southern part of Mexico. That runs, again, you'll see throughout the entire southern corridor. So if you're talking about trucks, this will end up being your transportation route into the western part of the United States. So with the exclusion of Texas, anything going west, California, even including the Midwest and the Northwest and Canada, will go through this little thread here, the number 15. This is also relevant, finally, because Mexico produces a huge amount of food in the area of vegetables and fruits and related staples. This is a very fertile area. The soil in this area is exceptional, but the ecology is equally fragile and exceptional. So we'll get into that in a moment. Our story goes down into the Yaqui Valley. The Yaqui Valley is the, I guess, geographically and hydrologically, it is the drainage basin to the Yaqui Basin. It's a delta. So it's this triangulated area in here. Really, if you look at this body of water, which is an artificial reservoir, that's the Rio Yaqui that causes this swell. The Yaqui Valley begins in here. Beacom, the town, sometimes called Beacom Switch, is right on the highway. And the highway kind of moves through into Obregon. So this whole area in here is known as the Yaqui Valley. Extremely important because this region produces 3/5 of Mexico's wheat. And it also produces a wide range of other agricultural products. And it also produces pork and beef and chicken. So that part is significant because American corn growers export heavily to Mexico, and a lot of that gets consumed in this region in here. Our clients live in their traditional territory, which is the Yaqui Valley. The 8 pueblos, which are the kind of inaugural signatories to a 1937 decree by President Lázaro Cárdenas, which demarcated a reserve of kind of unknown definition for the Yaquis, is in here. The 8 pueblos, including Pothom, as well as Cocorite, are here. Sorry, take that back. One of the problems, when I mentioned Cocorite, one of the problems is since the signing of the 1937 decree, there has been like movement and relocation of the pueblos. So so this is just such a nuanced thing. But if you look closely, Cocorite now is really like an exurb of Obregon. So Loma de Guamulchil, I refer to it as the new Cocorite because that's where one of the seats of Yaqui Pueblo governance sits. And it follows a story which I'll have to cover in greater detail about the demarcation of Yaqui territory from 1937 to the 1990s. But essentially in 1937, both the west and the east side of the river was part of the Yaqui territory, and it would have included the pueblos that were on the east side. And then after the 1990s, there was an amendment, a unilateral amendment that was made to the boundary line, and it effectively disenfranchised the pueblos that were part of the 1937 signing, because it relegated the remaining pueblos onto the west side. But more on that detail later. I'm just trying to give you some of the basic geography. But the point is this: when I started out by saying you have the Highway 19 from Tucson to Nogales, from Nogales to Sonora, throughout the rest of Mexico, you have the NAFTA Highway 15. Here is the NAFTA Highway. It cuts right through the Yaqui Valley. And as I said earlier, the Sierra Bucket that they're here, these are, for the most part, these are impassable. They're not easy to navigate through. So this is also important because you'll see this just as a matter of geography. Wherever you have flatlands, it just becomes a convenient place for right-of-ways. This is where natural gas lines are installed, cellular towers, and anything that requires some type of linear pathway to move, rail, for example, it will pass through this area because you can't go north. Okay, so I'll get back to this location in a moment, but I want to mention this one really interesting thing. It might be lost on the listener, but to put this into perspective, right now, the federal government, in partnership with the state of Sonora, are completing a bypass, and you'll see this highlight here. And I've taken the bypass, and it is a bypass. It's in the true sense, because prior to this, and it's not 100% complete, but near completion. Prior to this, what was so incredible to me was the idea that all overland truck traffic from southern and central Mexico on the western Pacific slope, so that's on the western side of the Sierra Madres, had to pass through Hermosillo. And it's crazy to think about, but there is still this intersection. I'm going to drill down to it, because I spent many years doing field work there. So one of the stopover places to get to the pueblos is Hermosillo, and there was a hotel that I've stayed at a number of times, and the traffic, like the truck traffic, is just insane. Like, it's just constant, and these are massive 72-foot long tractor trailers. They will double connect extra long tractor trailers. So they attempt to kind of make these trains out of these trucks. And for the longest time before the bypass, and I should say the bypass is a toll system, so truckers may still use this route that I'm describing. But this intersection right here in the city of Hermosillo, it's hard to believe, but if you were to block that intersection before the bypass, there was no possible way, efficiently anyways, in a timely manner, for food to be brought to the tables of America. That's putting it bluntly, but that is as simple as it is, because you can see the 15 is disjointed here, and to join them together, you have to make this cut across basically urban traffic, and there's a major intersection below an overpass here. And I've always been amazed by that, to think how the world can be held together so precariously at times without much thought given to it. But because of the bypass, if people take the bypass, and again, it's coming to me now, it's actually kind of expensive. It's actually a few dollars American. So I don't know if truckers will take it, who knows. But if you don't take the bypass and you cut through Hermosillo, you'll see the 15 cuts right through the downtown. There's a reservoir here, and this reservoir is not in fact being supplied any longer by the Rio Sonora, and you'll see that spouts from the top. And the Rio Sonora is an ailing, struggling river system in Sonora, and Hermosillo used to depend on it exclusively, and that's why they had the reservoir. That reservoir is now filled with Yaqui water, And so I think I've covered some of the topography just to kind of give you this the close proximity, if you will, to this connection. That intersection is worth billions of dollars, by the way. So billions and billions of dollars of goods every year pass along the number 15 to get into the United States and to deliver anything that Mexico can possibly export into the United States. And food is a big one. They also are starting to do kind of light electronic manufacturing, and it's diversifying heavily with investments from China. So there's a fledgling aerospace manufacturing industry near the Pueblos, and I'll get to that. Embraer has a small production facility here in Guaymas, and I think Bombardier may as well. Bombardier may have been there first. So the manufacturing and the sort of the value added and skills requirement is increasing in certain areas in Mexico. It's just such an important part of the quality of life that people enjoy in the United States and Canada, to put it bluntly. Anyways, I think I've covered that to the point of this discussion, because what I wanted to do was get right to the heart of our discussion about self-determination and relate that discussion to the environment and the facts at hand. So for many years, I was told, and I believe, the Rio Yaqui just flowed past the La Presa Oviachic through this windy system of a riverbed and then drained into the Pacific here, like a nice linear pathway. In fact, that was never the case. It's more likely the case that the river had several drainage points, which would have been a reflection of the changing surface water volume that was coming out of the Sierra Madres and the Sierra Bacatete. There's also other rivers that had defined names in this valley, and they're gone. My point to this is simply that the river's gone. So when you look at this and think, oh yeah, you can see the floodplain and the pathway of the river, that's actually not what you're looking at. To get right at it, the Oviachic Dam marks the end of the pathway of the Rio Yaqui. Any water that flows past the dam is captured, and it goes in one of two directions. It either goes to the east and follows a canal system to supply the what you might call, well, it's an ejido. It's a large agricultural collective here on the eastern side of the Rio Yaqui, which really burgeoned after the NAFTA. So this ejido is entitled to a water allotment from the Rio Yaqui, as is the city of Obregon. So there's a canal system here that runs parallel to the riverbed of the Rio Yaqui, and we can drill down, and you can see that there. So that canal flows year-round, delivering water. There's a spillway to the north, as well as a small reservoir called Agua Caliente, which captures the overflow when it occurs. But that water is spoken for. It's all an artificial human-made structure. On the west side of the riverbed, you can see that there's a canal system here, again, with a spillway system built in to capture excess water. If we go down to the river itself, you'll see it's empty. Now there's little pockets and reservoirs of water, and sometimes they've had bumper years where the Oviachic headgate has water flowing over the top. But if you look at the vegetation growth in the riverbed, that's not indicative of a permanent supply of water. In fact, that's indicative of something that's irregular. Just as a side, if you ever go into the Riito, if you're inclined, you can actually take a shovel and dig down a few feet, and you'll see that there's a greater concentration of water in the riverbed. And so that's kind of what's happening here to some degree, I would imagine. Okay, so the river is gone. Right. All right. So that's a great statement, Professor Hopkins. Very radical. What's controversial about that? Because it's dammed up and spoken for. What's the problem? Well, let's just go down here. Well, I guess Professor Hopkins, you're wrong, right? Because there's lots of water flowing here. Look at this. There's lots and lots of water. And the water, if you step back, continues to appear at the surface. And to get right at it, there's a drainage canal, an irrigation drainage canal here, which pools water off of the smaller ejido called Las Colonias Yaquis on the west side of the Rio Yaqui and moves that water out of the fields. Particularly for wheat, you're using a flood irrigation system to grow wheat, so you need to pump in a lot of water, sometimes 2 feet. You flood it, it drains out, and you have to move that water. So this is what this canal system does. So in effect, this is really not a river, but maybe a bit of a drainage canal. Yeah, but you know, there's lots of water here. Okay, so as I move to the spoiler now, I'll get these presented in greater resolution, but this is some basic mapping that we did earlier, and I measured the inflow of the ocean up the river. So we took a boat, we went up the river. I'll give you the video link. It's on the clinic YouTube channel. And we did a baseline measurement. Now, keeping in mind, you're not measuring a linear system, right? Because the water follows a very windy drainage route, which used to be the riverbed. Sorry, which is the riverbed, but used to hold the river. And I estimated it to be about 41 to 42 kilometers of permanent ocean inland inflow. My hunch, again, without any research funding or expertise, is that this has resulted in the desertification permanently, the permanent ruination of this delta, which was once one of the most fertile places to farm in all of Mexico, which is saying a lot. If you have any experience with gardening, you need to appreciate that the soil quality here is excellent. Literally on the sides of the roads, you'll see fruits that have fallen off of trucks and like they'll sprout up into trees. I mean, the soil is just so good. It's got the whole history of how good soil comes about is here. Basically, you have like volcanic activity and ash from hundreds of millions of years ago. You have compression, drainage, all the good stuff flowing out into the delta before it reaches the oceans. It's captured, held back into the earth. And the Yaquis have been here since time immemorial, but now it's trashed. I have another map that'll give you the estimate. I think it's about 1,900 square kilometers of absolute solid desertification. And what that means then, and countries like Israel have had to pay close attention to this. What that means is that the foreshore along the seafront here, the aquifer has collapsed. So under more natural circumstances, you would have freshwater drainage underground. And then the sort of geomorphological structure of the aquifer, meaning how the rock and the sediment work together to filter the fresh water and divert it, and at the same time hold back the saltwater incursion, which is an amazing thing to think about, that the aquifer can do that. That process has been ruined. So just to be clear, right, if you remember basic high school science and some of the properties of salt, salt will always be attracted to water. It will always want to absorb water. And so this coastal aquifer, the geological structure is so vital to preventing the intrusion of the ocean into the freshwater aquifer. And this is what's happened. We know that this has happened just from a layperson's perspective. And you'll see in the video that there are these little white tufts on the land. And what those represent are these, I call them salt pits, but they're depressions probably between 20 to 40 feet. I didn't measure them from the surface, but they're essentially just deep cavities in the earth, about 2 square kilometers plus. So they're irregular in shape, but the one that I observed, I did a rough estimate of at least 2 square kilometers of space. And the reason why they've collapsed is because the ground has become unstable with the removal of the coastal aquifer and the additional support of the groundwater reserve, right? So the ground falls. Now that happens in Arizona and in other places, but it's not usually like measured in feet. It's usually a couple of inches maybe. And there's other forms of instability like fissures in the ground, which basically are exactly what it is. It's just gaps that run along in the soil, these cracks that open up. So you'll see that, but like I said, these pits are different. And the reason why I think they're different is because I think there's this phenomenon happening. We haven't tested it, so it's just my hypothesis, that the ocean being under the ground in the aquifer, and that given the nature of salt, when it rains and the fresh water hits the surface, the salt water is attracted to the fresh water on the surface. And it effectively, through a process of percolation, pulls itself up. And we know salt and other minerals can do this, and do in fact do this anyways, and then essentially is mixed in with the fresh water, because that's what salt wants to do, at the surface, with the intense heat of this region, easily reaching 124 degrees, 125 sometimes. That water is immediately, vaporized almost. It evaporates quickly. And then what you're left is the mineralization, right? You're left with salt at the surface level, but it's thick and it cakes because it hasn't sedimented naturally. It's there through a process of percolation and extraction. And what I learned in this journey, and I'll show you the video, what's interesting is the Yaquis, at some point, some of them, I don't know the degree to which they engaged in this or continue to do this, were doing salt surface mining in these pits. So if you can get your burro or your horse, or if you have the gas money, a truck to drive into that area, it's pretty dicey if it's not 4-wheel drive. And if you have a sickle and some other basic tools, even a crowbar, you can harvest these really nice, beautiful pitch white salt plates. And there's a very active food market in the city of Obregon. You could just sell them there. And that's what they did. So that to me is really interesting. Okay, so why no water? I get it. Okay, you're saying, but where's the water? Well, the water's spoken for, right? It's a system that's over appropriated, and we can just do this sequentially through a walk up from the delta. So here's the delta, the drainage point. This used to be a mangrove estuary, and that's all gone. So it's terrible. If you go up the river, and if we start at Oviachic, that's allotted and spoken for vis-a-vis the city of Obregon and any of the agricultural ejidos, specifically the large one over here. And we can get into that in a little bit. Any water that's diverted to the Yaqui territory is actually not for the Pueblos. It's agricultural use water for the federally regulated ejido in this area. So a long time ago, many of the agricultural ejidos were federally regulated and managed. NAFTA and the amendments to the ejido laws changed much of that. But Las Colonias Yaquis is still one of the few that's under federal oversight. There's some customary allotment process of water between some of the Pueblos and Conagua and the uses, but these Pueblos are overwhelmingly, if not entirely, dependent upon private vendors for filtered water of varying quality. There's groundwater wells, but those have all been the ones that have been tested have been proven not to be fit for human consumption. So you actually have really poor Yaquis digging handmade wells and getting really sick off of it. But moving up the Rio Yaqui here past Oviachic, I said this earlier, so I'm glad I'm doing this, so it'll link it up again. The river winds its way through the mountains, right? It's not a floodplain. This is so hilly with these really tight curves and tight corners and peaks and really steep mountainsides. So the next major stopover is in the interior, and this reservoir is known as El Navillo. And I believe it was built in the 1960s. You can see it has quite a large reservoir here. In 2012, the Supreme Court of Mexico upheld this. There was an aqueduct project, a mega project that was put into place to provide the city of Hermosillo and the municipality of Hermosillo with water. And this brought into conflict the water rights that Mexico has never honored for the Yaquis, and then also nascent deeper political fights that manifested between the pueblos as well as the city of Obregon and Hermosillo. I'll get into that later. That's a really interesting story. But El Navillo was the sort of the friction point, because it's like the federal government literally put in a big straw. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's right there. Here's the head gate to El Navillo. It's right here. It's really quite narrow. And so when you see pictures, you'll see that there's just a massive drop. This is not in 3D, so we aren't really capturing the scope of depth and altitude. This is the aqueduct port right here. If you drill down, you'll see that these are just big intake tubes, and it moves the water 152 kilometers out of the Sierra Bacatetes, across these flatlands over to the west and into the Sonora Middle Basin to the city of Hermosillo, where it drains in here. And I've already seen major positive developments in the city of Hermosillo since 2012. They don't have the same water restrictions and rationing programs, et cetera, and businesses are thriving. Okay, so moving further north, we're still up in the mountains here, and we're way up in the mountains, going through the upper Yaqui Basin now. So El Navillo is in the middle basin. The Oviachic and the Pueblos are in the lower basin. This is the upper basin, La Angostura. This was the first major kind of modern dam on the Rio Yaqui. It's actually referenced in the 1937 decree, because President Lazaro Cardenas knew that the Yaqui River was going to be appropriated for water for other users, and he wanted to protect, for no other reason that I can see, he wanted to protect the Yaquis, and sourced the supply of water from the Angostura. That's going to be relevant to us later. Here is the Caridad copper mine. It's an old surface mine, and it has an allotment from the Rio Yaqui. And if we were to drill down further, you would see that it takes water in and also drains water back out. So there's a huge amount of mineral wealth in this entire upper region. And then lastly, the upper part of the Yaqui Basin goes into southeastern Arizona. This is known as the San Bernardino Valley. So that's not to be confused with the one in California, but people often do, just because the names are the same. And this is, there's a series of rivers that are no more, that used to flow into the Rio Yaqui. So maybe when it rains, well, certainly when it rains, this area fills up again. But this is one of the major overland kind of water arteries that would fill and drain into the Rio Yaqui. So I'll get into those rivers. There's three that are relevant. And then by the time you get into the central north part of the Sierra Bacatetes, you actually will see the beginnings of surface flow. But you can see it's fairly close to the border. So for now, I just wanted to give you this rough overview, and also to get into now in this next part the stuff that you can help me with. I'm going into the box. You'll see that for whatever reason, it just isn't letting me do this. Maybe I have to refresh it. Yes, okay, so this is a Reuters article. And as I said, in the middle and upper part of the basin, it's one of the areas of precious metal deposits that's of great importance for North America. Bisbee's copper deposit, and for that matter, all of Arizona's major deposits, are part of the same deposit family, if you will, that you end up finding in greater abundance in northern Sonora. This is an article where AMLO, the president of Mexico, has criticized Canada specifically. I want to say there's 14 Canadian mining companies that have been identified for failing to pay taxes to Mexico. So let me just get right at it. I have a hunch. I don't see how it's possible that there's, out of these companies, I think there's 14, as I said, not one of them would, to say that not one of them would be in the Yaqui Basin, I find impossible. In fact, I would say, I would feel comfortable saying that there ought to be a majority. Nearly 70% of foreign-owned mining companies operating in Mexico are based in Canada. Ta-da! So Canada really has its, it has some blood on its hands, and I'll talk about that specifically in this case. So the value of Canadian mining assets in Mexico is totaled 18.4 billion Canadian, according to the Mining Association of Canada. So I need to find what companies are in the Yaqui Basin. So there's going to be other articles about First Majestic Silver Corp and others. The reason why this is relevant is because in February of 2020, the Supreme Court of Canada made a ruling that was really significant, and no one has tested it out, but it's really clear. It basically says Canadian mining companies, they have to follow the letter of human rights law when they're doing business abroad. And not all Canadian mining companies, but there's a couple that have just done some very, very unethical, horrible things. And you have to imagine, you have to have been doing something really bad to get the Supreme Court of Canada to basically, bypass their version of the Alien Tort Claims Act, right? Like the defense of that's offered up in not triggering the Alien Tort Claims Act. So in the United States, right, this is kind of like the plaintiff's holy grail that's never been realized, which is how do you make mining, or how do you make natural resources development companies liable in the US for actions they do elsewhere? So Canada basically said, look, for the mining companies, this is going to be this situation. And it's kind of narrow, but it centers around just really, really horrible behavior. Now, so that's a way in for us. The mining companies will tell you in their public prospectuses, and this is a feature of Canadian law, which American law recognizes for the purposes of investment, and it's a good thing. It requires that the company publish like details of their permit conditions, and it'll include water allotments. So what I'm saying is, if there's mining companies, and there are Canadian mining companies in the Yaqui Basin, and they're pulling water allotments with permission of CONAGUA, the federal water authority. So under delegated authority of Mexico, Conagua can allot surface water of the Rio Yaqui to these Canadian mining companies. And if they don't pay any of their tax, I mean, that's bad enough. But what if the people downriver are literally starving from a lack of water? It sounds like a plausible, connection, and I want to go very softly on it, though. We will talk about the strategic reasons behind it, but I do want to go very softly on that. My point is not to rile the Canadian mining companies. Rather, it's to build a bridge with Mexico, because they're going to be there just, for as long as the Yaquis potentially. So that's the point. So I need to figure that one out. Who are those companies? All right. Number two, and thanks for hanging in there with me here.